Did you know that the ketchup in your fridge used to be made of fish guts? Yup, that red stuff you're dunking in your fries used to have 0 tomatoes in it. In fact, the word ketchup literally has nothing to do with tomatoes at all. So what in the world is ketchup? The name actually comes from the Chinese word Ketchup, a salty fermented fish sauce sailors used to survive those brutal months at sea. Picture this, it's 300 BCE and Chinese sailors are crossing dangerous waters in the open sea and establishing trade relationships with different kingdoms. Well, since refrigeration has yet to be a thing, any fish they had on the boat was preserved in salt. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just eat the fish. They would layer small fish with salt and put them in ceramic jars and seal them up and let them ferment for months until the fish is literally liquefied into this brown sticky sauce. Why go through all this trouble? Because eating plain rice and millet every day for months would drive anybody insane. This fermented fish sauce was kind of like their flavor hack. It was intense, lasted long, and packed with just enough nutrients to keep them alive. Now it's important to note that these sailors weren't just simple fishermen. They were actually merchants and traders. Their job was to export Chinese goods like silk, porcelain, lacquerware, ginger in exchange for foreign luxuries like spices, precious stones, and exotic woods. And most likely that's when these British soldiers first encountered this magical sauce. They probably saw Chinese sailors eating it with their meals, tried it, and instantly fell in love with it. I mean, why not? It had a long shelf life, transformed bland food into something edible, and gave them some essential nutrients. It even appeared in a 1690 slang dictionary where they listed ketchup as a high East Indian sauce, and high in this case just means like very intense and concentrated flavors.
You wanna get high?
So by the early 1700s, British and Dutch merchants were loading barrels and barrels of this fish sauce onto their ships to take back to Europe. A British merchant was even quoted saying,
"This catsup is as profitable for British merchants as it is for Chinese traders."
But there was just one massive problem. See, the journey from England to China took 9 months, and that fish sauce would only last about 6 months. So by the time the barrels reached Europe, they were either spoiled or tasted nothing like the amazing sauce they fell in love with in Asia. So rather than giving up, Europeans decided to reverse engineer the sauce using local ingredients. They tried mushrooms, walnuts, and anchovies, kind of blending them up and mixing them with wine, vinegar, and British spices to try to capture that umami punch you usually get in fish sauce. The result was this thin, pungent liquid smoothie that I can't imagine to smell that great, but by the early 1700s, this mushroom and walnut version of ketchup would start to appear in different cookbooks. And at this point, you might be wondering, well, why don't they just make fish sauce? It's like fish and salt. Well, in short, they had different fish in Europe, different climates, different bacteria, so it just wouldn't have tasted the same. But at this point, none of the ketchup recipes involved tomatoes. Where did the tomato come from? So when the British colonized America, they also brought their cookbooks, including one anchovy ketchup recipe. You can see it here in a 1742 cookbook, The Complete Housewife. So now the ketchup is in America. But it wasn't until James Mees came along when the recipe changed. James Mees was a Philadelphia scientist and a horticulturalist. He had a deep passion for plants and gardening, and among the plants he studied, he was specifically fascinated with tomatoes, also romantically known as love apples back then. And in one of his notes, he even suggested that love apples would make a fine catsup. So in 1812, his idea was finally put to the test. Because tomatoes were native to America, Mees set out to create a ketchup recipe using those local ingredients instead of relying on traditional imported goods like mushrooms and walnuts. Mees' recipe marked the first time tomatoes replaced mushrooms and walnuts, and more importantly, fish. Also, it wasn't fermented anymore. It was just a thick tomato sauce. And for the next few decades, people tried bottling and selling this version of ketchup, but due to the lack of preservation, sometimes like too much preservatives, the quality was very inconsistent. So nothing really took off. Then one day, Henry J. Heinz changed everything. In 1876, Henry Heinz launched his own tomato ketchup in a clear glass bottle, showing off that bright red sauce inside. He fixed the issue of shelf life by adding vinegar and sugar to Mees' recipe. This allowed the bottle ketchup to last like way longer than their competitors and tasted better too. But there was just one problem he didn't expect to happen. Since the glass bottles he had really thin walls, if the bottle wasn't processed correctly, the ketchup inside would accidentally ferment and they would literally explode, showering kitchens and dinner guests with glass and ketchup. I mean, it's like one of those science fair volcanoes. Glass shards everywhere, red sauce splattered on walls. Probably would have been like a crime scene. So Heinz immediately went back to the drawing board and tweaked the recipe and implemented stricter sanitization processes. These changes not only restored public trust, they also created a new standard for food safety in the early 1800s. And ketchup quickly became a staple condiment in American households. I mean, people were putting it on everything, on hot dogs, burgers, eggs. Allegedly, people even put ketchup on meat that was spoiled to mask the taste. But here's the twist. Heinz's famous original recipe was only 5 ingredients: tomato, vinegar, brown sugar, salt, and spices, and that was already a major departure from ketchup's origins. What started centuries ago as a salty fermented sauce turned into like a tomato-based sauce, and over time the balance kind of tipped further, because today's ketchup isn't even really about tomatoes, it's more about sugar. So what happened? You see, throughout ketchup's history, it fought one constant battle of basically not spoiling. Due to zero refrigeration, Heinz had to experiment with tons of different preservatives, and then around the 1900s, researchers made a game-changing discovery. They realized by loading up ketchup with a lot of sugar, it made it shelf-stable without any more artificial additives. This meant that sweet, thick tomato sauce would last longer on your table. But as a side note, you should really keep your ketchup in the fridge. Even Heinz says so.
I couldn't steal a ketchup. There were eyes on me all night.
To compare how much sugar has been added to ketchup, if we take a look at a recipe in the 1800s, which calls for 1 bushel of tomatoes to 1 pound of sugar, that's approximately 1% of the ketchup. And we take that and we compare it to the ketchup today, sugar is approximately 22 to 25% of the bottle, which is why it's hilarious that in 1981, the Reagan administration tried to classify ketchup as a vegetable. It's about as much as a vegetable as my green Skittles are vegetables. And honestly, that says less about ketchup itself, but more about what we've become and what we choose to value in our food. Once a savory, nutritious sauce that saved lives at sea, now it's more like a candy to save the fries we eat. Now we're done playing ketchup, I must admit, I'm gonna go relish in a plate of fries. In hindsight, that was always the move. Mayo!